The vampire myth and the self-centered personality, understanding the parallels. Sometimes, the greatest darkness hides in the brightest places, just like the most harmful people blend seamlessly into our lives. The vampire myth, found in many cultures, tells stories of creatures that drain the life force from others to stay alive. While this may seem like pure fantasy, it can be a helpful way to understand certain extreme behaviors in very self-centered people. These individuals often feed off others emotionally, taking energy, attention, and care without giving much back. Just as vampires need to drain blood to survive, these self-focused people thrive by constantly taking from those around them. We'll explore how this parallel can help us recognize and protect ourselves from these draining behaviors. Understanding these parallels can open your eyes to behaviors that might be affecting your relationships without you realizing it. By recognizing the ways self-centered individuals can drain your emotional energy, much like a vampire, you can better protect yourself from emotional harm. These insights can empower you to set boundaries, prioritize your well-being, and ultimately create healthier, more balanced interactions with others. Section 1. The origins of the vampire myth. The vampire myth has roots in folklore that spans across many cultures. For centuries, stories of vampires have been passed down, with each culture adding its own twist to the myth. In Eastern Europe, especially in countries like Romania and Serbia, vampires were believed to be reanimated corpses that preyed on the living, often appearing as someone familiar to their victims. In other regions, such as ancient Greece and China, similar myths involved spirits or creatures that drained life energy from humans. These stories typically reflected deep fears of death, disease, and the unknown, as well as concerns about protecting oneself from those who might exploit or harm others. As these myths spread, they evolved into the modern vampire archetype, which we often see in movies and literature today. A figure that thrives by taking from others, whether it's their blood, energy, or life force. Let's explore these key themes. 1. Immortality. One of the most prominent aspects of the vampire myth is their eternal life. Vampires don't age, and they escape the natural cycle of life and death by feeding on the blood of the living. This idea of immortality symbolizes a desire to escape vulnerability and the fear of decay. In folklore, vampires defy nature, using the life force of others to sustain their existence indefinitely. This theme represents a kind of emotional greed, an endless need for more that never allows for true rest or contentment. Vampires are eternally unsatisfied, always hungry for what others have. 2. Feeding off others. Vampires are parasites by nature. Their survival depends entirely on draining the blood, or life force, of their victims. This dependency makes them dangerous, as their continued existence comes at the cost of others' well-being. This idea of feeding off others is central to the vampire myth, symbolizing an imbalanced relationship where one party continually takes without giving anything meaningful in return. This act of draining others reflects an emotional truth. Some individuals sustain themselves by drawing energy, attention, and support from others without ever contributing or replenishing what they take. 3. Fear of sunlight. In almost every iteration of vampire folklore, sunlight is fatal to vampires. The light of the sun exposes them for what they truly are, and their bodies can't survive the exposure. This fear of sunlight represents the fear of being truly seen, of having the truth revealed. For vampires, the darkness allows them to operate in secret, hiding their true nature while they prey on others. Sunlight, then, symbolizes the truth and exposure that they cannot bear, because it destroys the illusion they maintain in the shadows. This fear of exposure highlights a vulnerability that they will go to great lengths to avoid. Parallels with behavior. Now, let's draw parallels to extremely self-focused individuals. Like vampires, these individuals often seek to sustain their sense of self by drawing from others, emotionally rather than physically. 1. Immortality and emotional greed. Just as vampires constantly seek new sources of blood to maintain their immortality, self-focused individuals exhibit an insatiable need for validation, admiration, and attention. This endless pursuit can never be fully satisfied because it's not about the substance of the connection, but about maintaining their own sense of importance. These individuals often drain the emotional energy of those around them, always needing more without considering the well-being of others. 2. Feeding off others emotionally. Similar to how vampires depend on blood, extremely self-centered people rely on the emotional energy of those around them to feel fulfilled. They might seek constant praise, reassurance, or acts of service, but they rarely give back in meaningful ways. Relationships with such individuals often feel one-sided, as if you are always giving and they are always taking. Over time, this leaves the people around them feeling drained, much like the victims of a vampire. Their well-being relies on taking from others rather than building something reciprocal. 3. Fear of sunlight, avoidance of truth. Just as vampires avoid the sunlight, self-focused individuals often fear exposure to their true nature. They avoid honest self-reflection or confrontation that might reveal their flaws, insecurities, or harmful behaviors. If someone tries to bring these issues to light, they may respond with deflection, denial, or even aggression. The sunlight of truth is dangerous to them because it threatens to destroy the carefully constructed image they project. Their fear of exposure makes them resistant to growth or change, keeping them in the dark and relying on others to sustain their emotional needs. By exploring these key themes and drawing these parallels, we can gain a deeper understanding of the dynamics at play in relationships with extremely self-focused individuals. Just like vampires in folklore, these individuals can cause significant harm if left unchecked, draining those around them of their emotional strength and well-being. Section 2. Feeding off energy, emotional vampirism. Exploration of the trait. In vampire mythology, vampires need to drain the life force of others to survive, often through blood. This act of feeding is symbolic of how some extremely self-focused people drain the emotional energy of those around them. These individuals may not literally consume blood, but they rely heavily on others to sustain their own emotional state. When you're around someone like this, it can feel as though they're always drawing something from you, whether it's attention, validation, or emotional support. They may monopolize conversations, constantly need reassurance, or demand that their needs always come first. Over time, this constant neediness can leave you feeling emotionally depleted. Much like a vampire who needs fresh victims to stay alive, these individuals can leave you feeling empty and exhausted as they take more and more from you without replenishing what they've taken. The key to understanding emotional vampirism is recognizing the imbalance it creates in relationships. Just like a vampire offers nothing but harm to its victims, these self-focused individuals often fail to reciprocate the emotional support they demand. They thrive on the energy, attention, and care you give them, yet they offer little to nothing in return. This leaves you feeling drained and unappreciated, while they continue to seek more from you. Practical examples. Let's make this concept relatable with some everyday examples of emotional vampirism. Imagine having a friend or partner who always turns the conversation back to themselves no matter what. You could be sharing something important, but somehow the conversation always circles back to their problems, their triumphs, or their needs. At first, you might not notice it, but over time, you begin to realize that you're giving more than you're receiving in this relationship. Another example could be a colleague or family member who constantly seeks your help or emotional support, but never offers the same in return. You find yourself comforting them, helping them through their issues, and being there for them whenever they need you. But when you're the one in need, they seem to vanish or offer only superficial support. You're left feeling drained, as if your emotional reserves have been tapped dry, while they move on to their next source of support. Emotional vampires can also show up in romantic relationships. You might be with a partner who always demands your attention and validation, needing constant reassurance that they're loved, admired, or valued. No matter how much you give, it's never enough, and they keep asking for more. Over time, this takes a toll on your emotional health, as you constantly give without receiving the same level of care in return. Reflection point. Take a moment to reflect on your own life. Have you ever felt like you were giving far more than you were receiving in a relationship? Maybe it was a friendship, a romantic relationship, or even a professional connection. Did you feel like you were constantly pouring your energy into someone else, only to find yourself emotionally exhausted? Think about how that experience affected you. Did you feel like you had to keep giving just to keep the relationship going, even if it left you drained? Reflecting on these experiences can help you recognize when you're dealing with an emotional vampire. It's important to remember that healthy relationships should involve mutual support and care, not one-sided giving that leaves you feeling depleted. If you've been in situations like this before, consider how you can protect yourself in the future by setting boundaries, or even barriers if need be, and ensuring that your emotional needs are also met. Section 3. Fear of exposure, the light of truth. Vampires and light. One of the most consistent elements of vampire mythology is their aversion to sunlight. In many stories, exposure to sunlight is not just harmful, but deadly to vampires. This is because sunlight symbolizes truth, clarity, and the revealing of one's true nature, things that vampires, as creatures of darkness, cannot withstand. The darkness allows vampires to conceal their true form and intentions, preying on others without being seen for what they truly are. Sunlight, on the other hand, exposes them, stripping away their ability to hide and forcing them into vulnerability. This symbolism reflects a broader theme of avoidance and fear. Fear of being seen, of having one's true nature revealed. The idea that sunlight can destroy vampires underscores how terrifying it is for them to be exposed, as it not only reveals their weaknesses, but also destroys the facade they rely on to survive. Self-focused behavior. Now, let's draw the parallel to extremely self-centered individuals. Just as vampires avoid sunlight, these individuals often go to great lengths to avoid the light of self-reflection, vulnerability, and truth. They may project an image of confidence, superiority, or infallibility, but beneath that surface, there's often a deep fear of being exposed for who they truly are, flawed, vulnerable, and imperfect. These individuals avoid self-reflection because it threatens the carefully constructed image they present to the world. If they were to truly look at themselves, they would have to confront uncomfortable truths about their behavior, their motivations, or their impact on others. This fear of facing the truth drives them to avoid any situation that might expose their flaws or weaknesses. Like vampires avoiding the sun, they stay in the darkness of denial, evasion, and superficiality, where they can continue to believe in their own narrative without challenge. Protective behavior. To maintain this facade, self-focused individuals often engage in a variety of defensive behaviors designed to keep the light of truth at bay. They might deflect criticism by shifting the blame onto others, avoiding accountability for their actions. For example, if someone points out a flaw or mistake, they might respond by attacking the other person's character or by bringing up unrelated issues to divert attention. This blame shifting allows them to stay in the shadows, avoiding any real examination of their behavior. They might also engage in gaslighting, where they twist the truth to make others doubt their own perceptions and experiences. This tactic helps them maintain control over the narrative, ensuring that they remain in a position of power while others are left questioning their own reality. By keeping others in the dark, they avoid the risk of being exposed and can continue to operate without having to face the consequences of their actions. Another common tactic is minimizing or dismissing the concerns of others. When confronted with how their actions have hurt someone, they might downplay the impact, making the other person feel as though they're overreacting or being too sensitive. This allows them to avoid taking responsibility, as they shift the focus away from their behavior and onto the perceived shortcomings of others. In these ways, self-focused individuals, much like vampires, work to protect themselves from exposure. They avoid the light that might reveal their true nature, keeping themselves safely in the shadows where they can continue to maintain their facade. Recognizing these behaviors is crucial for understanding how these individuals operate and for protecting oneself from being manipulated or drained by them. Just as sunlight is the key to destroying a vampire, bringing the truth into the open is essential for breaking free from the influence of those who rely on darkness to maintain their control. Section 4. The eternal pursuit of more never satisfied, insatiable hunger. One of the most defining characteristics of vampires is their insatiable thirst for blood. No matter how much they consume, it's never enough. They are eternally driven by the need for more. This never-ending hunger is a powerful metaphor for the behavior of extremely self-centered individuals. Just as a vampire's thirst can never be quenched, these individuals are never truly satisfied with the attention, admiration, or validation they receive. They constantly crave more, seeking to fill an emotional void that can never be fully filled. This insatiable need stems from a deep-seated insecurity or emptiness that they try to compensate for by drawing from others. Whether it's through praise, flattery, or the control they exert over those around them, they are always seeking the next fix to momentarily satisfy their cravings. But just like the vampire who must feed again and again, these individuals quickly find that whatever validation they receive is fleeting, and their hunger soon returns. Relating to real life. In real life, this insatiable need for more manifests in various ways. For example, you might know someone who constantly seeks admiration or attention, always steering conversations back to themselves or fishing for compliments. No matter how much reassurance they get, it's never enough. They always need more to feel good about themselves. Another common behavior is the pursuit of control or power in relationships. These individuals might manipulate others to feel superior or to validate their own self-worth. They might engage in behaviors like guilt-tripping, playing the victim, or using others as tools to boost their own ego. This constant need for more control or validation creates a dynamic where the self-focused person is always taking but never satisfied, leaving those around them feeling used and drained. Impact on relationships. The toll this behavior takes on relationships is significant. When one person is always giving, whether it's emotional support, attention, or validation, and the other is always taking, the relationship becomes imbalanced and unhealthy. Over time, the person who is constantly giving may begin to feel exhausted, unappreciated, and even resentful. They might feel like they're walking on eggshells, always trying to meet the other person's insatiable demands, but never quite succeeding. This imbalance can lead to a breakdown in the relationship as the giver starts to pull away to protect their own emotional well-being. In some cases, they might feel trapped, unable to leave because the self-focused individual has created a dependency where the giver's identity or self-worth becomes tied to keeping the other person satisfied. This dynamic can be emotionally draining and damaging, often leaving the giver feeling empty and depleted, much like a vampire's victim who has been drained of blood. Recognizing this pattern is crucial for maintaining healthy relationships. It's important to set boundaries and ensure that the relationship is reciprocal, where both parties are giving and receiving in a balanced way. If you find yourself constantly giving without receiving anything in return, it might be time to reassess the relationship and consider whether it's truly beneficial for your emotional health. Just as a vampire can't survive without feeding, a self-focused individual will continue to drain those around them unless they are forced to face the consequences of their behavior. Section 5. Shrinking without sustenance. Dependency. Vampires and sustenance. In vampire mythology, the idea that vampires must feed on blood to survive is central. Without this vital sustenance, they begin to weaken, shrivel, and eventually die. This need for a continuous supply of blood highlights their dependency on others for their very existence. It's not just a preference, but a life or death necessity. This relentless need for sustenance drives their behavior, making them perpetually focused on finding their next meal. Behavioral parallels. This concept of dependency can be directly connected to the behavior of extremely self-centered individuals. Just as vampires rely on blood, these individuals rely on constant external validation to sustain their self-image. Their sense of worth and identity is not internally grounded, but is instead built on the admiration, attention, and approval of others. Without this external validation, they begin to shrink emotionally, much like a vampire deprived of blood. When they don't receive the validation they crave, they may become irritable, angry, or withdrawn. Their behavior might shift dramatically, where once they were charming or engaging, they might now seem sullen, resentful, or even aggressive. This change occurs because their fragile self-image begins to crumble without the steady stream of external reinforcement. They depend on others to keep their sense of self afloat, and without that input, they feel lost, insignificant, or unworthy. This dependency creates a cycle where the self-focused person is continually seeking out new sources of validation. They might latch onto people who are willing to provide the attention they need, often moving from one person to another to keep their emotional needs met. This behavior can be exhausting for those around them, as they are constantly required to give more and more, with little in return. Learning to recognize. It's essential for listeners to learn to recognize when they are dealing with someone who exhibits this type of dependency. There are several signs to watch for, such as a person who constantly seeks reassurance, frequently brings conversations back to themselves, or becomes agitated when they aren't the center of attention. They might also display a pattern of shifting from one source of validation to another, never staying satisfied for long with any one person's attention. They often have a cycling self-image, since deep down they know that something is fundamentally wrong. Once you recognize these behaviors, it's important to protect your own emotional well-being. This might involve setting clear boundaries, such as limiting the time you spend with the person, or being firm about not engaging in behavior that only serves to boost their ego at your expense. It's also crucial to recognize when the relationship has become too draining and to consider whether it's time to distance yourself. Managing your interactions with self-focused individuals requires both awareness and self-care. You don't have to be the constant source of validation they crave, and it's okay to step back if their neediness is taking a toll on your emotional health. By recognizing the signs and taking steps to protect yourself, you can avoid being drained by someone else's dependency, much like how one might avoid falling prey to a vampire's insatiable hunger. Let's briefly explore other common traits of vampires and the parallels between the vampire mythology and extremely self-centered individuals. Trait: strength, speed, shapeshifting, and hypnosis. Supernatural strength. Just as vampires use their physical strength to overpower others, self-centered individuals often leverage their emotional or psychological strength to dominate relationships, ensuring their needs always come first. Supernatural speed. Self-centered people can quickly manipulate situations or rush decisions to keep others off balance, much like a vampire's ability to move at incredible speeds. Shapeshifting. Like vampires changing forms, self-centered individuals often alter their behavior to fit their needs, presenting different personas depending on the situation, making it difficult for others to see their true nature. Hypnosis or mind control. Self-centered people, like vampires, can exert a form of psychological control over others, using charm, manipulation, or persuasion to get what they want, often without the other person realizing it. Trait: enhanced senses, invulnerability, healing, and no reflection. Enhanced senses. Self-centered individuals are often keenly aware of others' vulnerabilities and can exploit these weaknesses to maintain control or gain advantage, much like a vampire with heightened senses. Invulnerability. Just as vampires are immune to many forms of harm, self-centered people often present themselves as untouchable or above criticism, refusing to acknowledge their flaws or mistakes. Healing abilities. Self-centered individuals quickly recover from setbacks by deflecting blame or reinterpreting events to maintain their self-image, akin to a vampire's rapid healing from physical wounds. No reflection. Like vampires with no reflection, self-centered individuals often lack true self-awareness. They avoid introspection and refuse to see themselves as they truly are, which prevents personal growth. Trait: religious symbols, invitation, pale complexion, and cold skin. Fear of religious symbols. Self-centered individuals may avoid people or situations that challenge their authority or self-image, much like how vampires are repelled by religious symbols that expose their true nature. Inability to enter without invitation. Just as vampires need to be invited in, self-centered individuals often rely on others to let them into their lives, gaining trust or sympathy before exploiting it for their own gain. Pale complexion. This can symbolize the emotional coldness or detachment that self-centered individuals often display, focusing more on their needs than on truly connecting with others. Cold skin. Like a vampire's icy touch, self-centered people may interact with others in a way that lacks warmth or emotional empathy, leaving those around them feeling emotionally cold or unfulfilled. Trait: sharp fangs, no pulse, cunning, and stakes. Sharp fangs. The metaphorical fangs of self-centered individuals are their sharp words or actions, which they use to wound others emotionally, draining them of confidence or self-worth. No pulse or breathing. Just as vampires are undead, self-centered people often exhibit a lack of genuine emotional life, going through the motions of relationships without truly engaging or caring. Cunning and manipulative. Self-centered individuals, like vampires, are often highly cunning, using manipulation and deceit to get what they want, carefully planning their actions to maintain control. Fear of stakes. The metaphorical stake through the heart for self-centered individuals is the confrontation with truth or accountability. They fear this because it threatens their carefully constructed self-image and the control they exert over others. To avoid this, they often spin narratives and conflate situations to cast themselves as the hero victim, a role that allows them to deflect blame while maintaining a sense of superiority. This tactic not only protects their ego, but also manipulates others into seeing them as both strong and unfairly persecuted, further entrenching their control and deflecting scrutiny from their true behavior. Trait: running water, garlic, death-like sleep, and eternal youth. Fear of running water. Self-centered individuals may avoid situations that require genuine change or self-improvement, just as vampires cannot cross running water, symbolizing purity and cleansing. Allergic to garlic. Like vampires repelled by garlic, self-centered individuals might avoid those who embody honesty, integrity, or moral strength, as these qualities can expose or challenge their behavior. Death-like sleep. The death-like sleep of vampires parallels the emotional dormancy of self-centered individuals who refuse to engage in meaningful personal development or emotional growth. Eternal youth. Just as vampires retain their youthful appearance, self-centered people often cling to an idealized self-image, refusing to acknowledge their flaws or the realities of aging and imperfection. Trait: bloodline creation. Self-centered individuals, like vampires who create new vampires, often influence others to adopt their mindset or behavior, extending their control and perpetuating their self-centeredness through others. They may infect others with their attitudes or manipulative behaviors, creating a network of relationships where their influence remains dominant. Trait: humans vastly outnumber vampires. Vampires and humans. In vampire mythology, vampires are often depicted as a small, elusive population compared to the vast number of humans. Despite their power and the fear they inspire, they are always in the minority, living in the shadows, because they cannot survive without the humans they prey upon. This imbalance highlights the reality that vampires, no matter how powerful they seem, are dependent on a much larger population to sustain their existence. Parallel with behavior. Similarly, extremely self-centered individuals are often surrounded by people who vastly outnumber them in terms of emotional capacity, empathy, and genuine connection. While these individuals might seem dominant or controlling in their immediate circles, the broader reality is that they rely heavily on the goodwill, energy, and support of those around them to maintain their self-image and emotional needs. Just as vampires cannot survive without humans, self-centered individuals cannot thrive without the attention and validation they extract from others. However, the fact that they are outnumbered means that their influence is limited to those they can personally manipulate or control. This also means that, like vampires, they are inherently vulnerable. Their power is not intrinsic, but borrowed from those they drain emotionally. Empowerment perspective. This imbalance offers an empowering perspective. The vast majority of people have the emotional strength and capacity to resist being drained by self-centered individuals. By recognizing their collective power and setting boundaries, individuals can prevent self-centered people from taking more than they give, thereby limiting their influence. Just as humans in vampire lore have the power to protect themselves with tools like garlic and sunlight, people can protect themselves from emotional vampirism by banding together, sharing insights, and supporting one another. The sheer number of empathetic, emotionally healthy individuals vastly outweighs the few who seek to drain them, making it possible to minimize the impact of self-centered behavior through collective awareness and action. These combined traits illustrate how the characteristics of vampires can metaphorically represent the behaviors of extremely self-centered individuals, offering deep insights into their psychological dynamics. It's quite possible the mythology came about from observing these types of individuals. Section 6. Protecting yourself from emotional vampires' boundaries as garlic. In dealing with everyday relationships, we often talk about the importance of setting healthy boundaries, guidelines that help maintain mutual respect and balance in our interactions. However, when it comes to extremely self-centered individuals, boundaries alone might not be enough, because healthy boundaries keep the right people in. Just as garlic in vampire lore creates a strong, tangible barrier that keeps vampires at a safe distance, you may need to establish firm, non-negotiable barriers with these individuals. Unlike healthy boundaries, which are flexible and adaptable based on mutual respect, barriers are rigid and protective, designed to prevent these individuals from encroaching on your emotional and mental space. These barriers are essential because, unfortunately, self-centered individuals are more likely to push against or ignore traditional boundaries, making it necessary to enforce stronger, more definitive lines. Actionable steps. To protect yourself from emotional vampirism, you must go beyond setting healthy boundaries and establish solid barriers. Here are some actionable steps to do just that. 1. Define non-negotiable barriers. Reflect on what behaviors you absolutely cannot tolerate and identify situations where a firm, clear barrier is necessary. For example, you might decide that you will no longer engage in certain types of conversations or that you will limit contact to only essential communication. 2. Be unyielding in enforcement. Unlike flexible boundaries, barriers require firm enforcement. When a self-centered individual attempts to cross these lines, it's crucial that you stand your ground. This might involve reiterating your stance, cutting off communication when necessary, or removing yourself from situations where your barriers are not respected. 3. Use barriers to limit access. Consider who has access to your time, energy, and emotional resources. Set clear limits on how much of yourself you're willing to give, and don't hesitate to enforce those limits strictly. For example, if you find that interacting with a particular person constantly and consistently leaves you feeling drained, it may be necessary to drastically reduce or even cut off contact. 4. Communicate the consequences. Make it clear that crossing these barriers will result in specific consequences, such as distancing yourself or ending the relationship. This communication doesn't need to be confrontational, but should be direct and leave no room for misunderstanding. Here's how you can approach this. Example phrases. I need to be clear that if you continue to ignore my boundaries, I will have to step back from this relationship to protect my well-being. If this behavior continues, I'll need to limit our interactions because it's impacting me negatively. I want to maintain a positive relationship with you, but if these boundaries aren't respected, I'll have to reconsider our connection. Gauging their reactions. Pay close attention not only to what they say in response, but also to their body language and overall demeanor. Here's what to look for. Positive signs. Acknowledgement. They verbally acknowledge your boundaries and the consequences you've outlined, possibly saying something like, I understand, and I'll work on respecting your boundaries. Open body language. They maintain open body language, such as uncrossed arms, direct eye contact, and a relaxed posture, which indicates they are receptive to what you're saying. Questions for clarification. They might ask questions for clarification, such as, can you help me understand what I can do differently? Or, what specifically do you need from me? This shows a willingness to understand and respect your needs. Negative signs. Defensiveness. They become defensive, perhaps saying things like, I don't see what the big deal is, or you're overreacting. This indicates a lack of willingness to take responsibility. Dismissive or mocking tone. They might respond with a dismissive tone or sarcastic comments like, sure, whatever you say, or I guess I'm always the bad guy. This suggests they are not taking your concerns seriously. Closed body language. Watch for closed body language such as crossed arms, avoiding eye contact, or leaning back in a dismissive manner. These signs often indicate resistance or unwillingness to engage constructively. Gaslighting or manipulation. If they try to twist the conversation to make you feel guilty or question your own feelings, saying things like, "You're being too sensitive," or "You're imagining things," this is a strong indicator of unhealthy dynamics. Further examples of responses and what they indicate. Positive response. "I didn't realize this was affecting you so much, but I'll make sure to respect your boundaries moving forward." Paired with genuine concern in their tone and body language, this indicates they value the relationship and are willing to make changes. Negative response. "If you feel that way, maybe we should just stop talking." This may be a sign of either passive-aggressive behavior or an attempt to manipulate you into backing down from your boundaries. Final thoughts. After communicating the consequences, give them some time to process what you've said. Sometimes initial defensiveness can soften into a more productive conversation once they've had time to think. However, if their reaction remains negative or dismissive, it's important to follow through on the consequences you've outlined to maintain your own boundaries and protect your well-being. Recognizing these signs and responding accordingly helps you maintain control of the situation and ensures that your boundaries are respected. 5. Recognize the need for distance. Understand that sometimes the only effective barrier is significant distance. This might mean removing yourself entirely from a toxic relationship or creating physical and emotional space that cannot easily be breached. 6. Seek reinforcement. Just as a fortress needs strong walls, your barriers may need reinforcement from external sources. This could involve seeking support from friends, family, or even professional help to ensure that your barriers are respected and maintained. It's important to recognize that while healthy boundaries work well in most relationships, dealing with extremely self-centered individuals often requires more drastic measures. Barriers are not just about protecting yourself, they're about reclaiming your power and ensuring that your energy isn't siphoned away by those who don't respect your needs. These barriers are your defense against being drained and manipulated. By establishing and enforcing these barriers, you not only protect your emotional well-being, but also send a clear message that your energy and time are valuable and not up for grabs. This empowers you to focus on relationships that are truly reciprocal and fulfilling, where your needs are acknowledged and respected. Ultimately, these barriers are your strongest tools in maintaining your emotional health and integrity, ensuring that you remain in control of your life, even when faced with individuals who seek to exploit and drain you. Just like garlic and sunlight protect against vampires, your barriers protect you from those who would otherwise take more than they give, allowing you to preserve your energy for the people and activities that truly matter. Closing remarks. Throughout this episode, we've explored the intriguing parallels between vampire mythology and the behaviors of extremely self-centered individuals. We've seen how traits like insatiable hunger, fear of exposure, and dependency on others for sustenance are mirrored in the way some people drain the emotional energy of those around them. Just as vampires need blood to survive, these individuals rely on constant validation, admiration, and control to maintain their self-image. We've also delved into both the overt and covert aspects of their behavior. While they may project an image of confidence, superiority, or infallibility, beneath the surface often lies a deep fear of being exposed for who they truly are, flawed, vulnerable, and imperfect. This duality makes them more elusive and difficult to deal with, as they may oscillate between overt displays of dominance and subtle manipulative tactics to maintain their control. Recognizing these dynamics is key to understanding how they operate and how to protect yourself from being drained. The key takeaway is that you have the power to protect your emotional well-being. By recognizing both the overt and covert behaviors of these individuals, you can take proactive steps to set boundaries and enforce barriers where necessary. Understanding that their confident exterior often masks deep vulnerabilities allows you to see through their facade and maintain your own sense of balance. Remember, your emotional health is your responsibility, and by shining a light on these behaviors, you can prevent them from having control over your life. As we conclude, I encourage you to take some time to reflect on your own relationships and interactions. Are there individuals in your life who leave you feeling drained, unappreciated, or manipulated? Have you allowed any emotional vampires to enter your life, perhaps without even realizing it? Consider both the overt and covert aspects of their behavior. Are they openly demanding, or do they subtly manipulate and control? If so, now is the time to reclaim your power. Assess where you need to set stronger boundaries or establish barriers, and take those steps to protect your energy. You deserve relationships that uplift and support you, not ones that drain you. By taking control of your emotional health and being aware of both the obvious and hidden tactics these individuals use, you create space for more fulfilling, reciprocal connections in your life. As always, remember that once you shine a light on the darkness, it loses its power over you. Protect your energy, guard your light, and let no one, overt or covert, drain your spirit.